All right, we are live, I think, finally. Sorry for the time mix-up for anyone who was here 2 hours early. We admire your dedication. Hopefully you're still here. Um, so, she doesn't need much introduction, but welcome to Sam, Yo Samdy Sam.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
I'm guessing a lot of you out there have already seen her YouTube channel. If you have not, then check it out after this live, not right now, just a little bit later. So Sam is also one of the speakers at my upcoming Autism from the Inside online summit that's coming up on the 19th of September. It's a completely free 5-day event with over 20 autistic speakers from all over the world. So link is in the description if you would like to register for that. And I guess this live session today is a bit of a get to know the speaker type event. So we will hear a little bit from Sam. We've worked together a little bit in the past, but we don't know each other super well. So I'm looking forward to this as well.
Yeah, it should be good. We did a very popular live a couple of years ago, I think. Actually, that was hosted on my channel, wasn't it?
It was insanely popular. I think it's got like 200,000 views or something now.
Yeah, and it was just us
on
talking
Autism
for like
Diagnosis.
2 hours or something. Yeah. It was a good one though. I don't even remember what we talked about, but clearly it was popular.
Yeah, I remember the topic. Topic was masking.
Okay.
But I can't remember what we actually said. But it must have been good, presumably. So
yeah, I hope that this one will be as good, as interesting, even though we don't have a specific topic. Well, we kind of do have a topic, don't we? Autism.
The topic that I had in the back of my head was just to get to know a little bit more about your story. I mean, you've gone through the autism diagnosis, recently the ADHD diagnosis. What was that sort of like for you to start this journey before you jumped online as a super popular celebrity now?
internet celebrity. Yeah, I mean, the autism diagnosis, that was really the turning point. That was the significant point of my life where I felt like, almost like I was allowed to, I don't want to say get a second chance, but like I was reborn. Instead of being the person that I thought I was like, oh, no, actually, I'm this person, but I've been her all along. So, when I was diagnosed in my early 30s, it was a relief, and it's made a huge impact on my life. And that's not to say I don't really think that, I felt like I needed a diagnosis back then, but I don't think it's really necessary. Once you get that moment of, oh, that's it, that's the reason, that aha moment, it's like everything changes from then. And the ADHD was something that I kind of denied for a long time because even though there's probably more stigma around autism in general society, the ADHD stuff was the stuff that I felt really ashamed of. And that was the stuff that it was like I didn't talk as much about because I was just like, I don't want everyone to know that I can't manage these simple things, And so I was sort of dealing with my own internalized sort of shame and stigma there about all these reasons why I wasn't good enough, why I was lazy and unmotivated and disorganized and all these things. And so the ADHD thing has also been freeing because because I've started meds and I'm like, actually this was something that wasn't my fault, and now I can do things, and now I can I can think about starting a task, and instead of thinking about it and being unable to take action, I just do it, and I'm like, oh, it wasn't a personal flaw, it wasn't all of these things. So I think the process of diagnosis is one that allows you to shed many layers of emotional baggage, shame, all these kind of things, and do a lot of work on yourself and realize that you aren't as broken as maybe you thought. You aren't as rubbish at things. And that's a lot of my motivation for the content that I produce, is to just get away from this disorder that there's something wrong, and just try and focus on information and sort of like neutral, judgment-free information about all these things that we experience every day.
And I guess there's a pretty big difference between sort of embracing the cool stuff. Oh, that's a bit quirky, that's kind of cool, and really embracing and giving yourself permission for the things that are really not so good, and you have to kind of be kind to yourself about.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that has become so much more important to me this past year with my second child, who was she had silent reflux, they call it, and for those of you who follow my channel will know that that involves a distinct lack of silence, and
Yep.
I reacted like an autistic person would, who with noise sensitivity would react to ongoing screaming, hours for hours and hours each day, and it's really hard not to hate yourself for the way that you react to something that is a reasonable reaction, and but it's something that when you work on doing that, it really does make a difference. You have to change the internal scripts in your head from ones that beat yourself up to saying that, I'm an autistic person. This is how autistic people react. This is how probably most people react, and trying to get away from that sense of I should be doing better, because that's the dangerous place to be.
You mentioned that the diagnosis is not as important to you at the moment. Do you want to, like, what's it been like to come to terms with that as what it really means rather than just a piece of paper?
Well, when I was going through my autism diagnosis several years ago, I felt the reason that I thought, no, I do want to pursue a diagnosis, is because I felt that if I didn't, nobody would believe me. And I don't think that is a necessarily wrong. I don't think anyone would have believed me if I started saying, yeah, I feel a little bit autistic. Like, people would be like, okay, cool, or whatever, or something. But the thing that I've learned is that even with a diagnosis, people still don't know they don't necessarily treat you any better. They don't necessarily, it's not an automatic ticket to being like, oh, she's got a diagnosis, this is very important and significant. There's a lot of people who like still roll your eyes and they'll be like, well, everyone's getting diagnosed these days, kind of thing, so it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't give me the free pass that perhaps I thought, oh, well, with an official diagnosis from a real psychologist, everyone will just instantly believe me. It doesn't work like that. And so that's part of the reason why I'm a bit like, now it doesn't matter to me to get an ADHD diagnosis, because number one, I know that the ADHD assessment process is way less in depth than the autism assessment process. My husband was diagnosed in about an hour or something. I mean, okay, maybe he's a little bit more of an obvious one, but they do questionnaires, they do these things, and I just think, okay, what's the point? The reason that I didn't do that, though, is because in this country with an autism diagnosis, you are allowed to be prescribed ADHD meds for autism related symptoms, which of course for me confirmed actually the meds working confirmed my diagnosis for me more than any doctor ever would, because I'm like, wow, they work so well, I can't possibly not have ADHD. It's like it's a completely difference. It was sort of I don't know what's the expression, night and day or something. But in terms of other people, the last few years, obviously I have networked and connected with a lot of people online, and I don't think necessarily that diagnosis is necessary for everyone. And I think it could possibly be, it can be used against you in a lot of ways. Legally speaking, for sure. And so, it is a complicated question. And I think a few years ago I was a little bit more like you should get your diagnosis. And now I'm a little bit more critical of the medical model. Why do we need a medical diagnosis of something like autism? If you need to access services, why can't you access these services when you need them? For example, like speech therapy or something. You should be able to access that without a diagnosis. Well, I don't know, that's just an example. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like anyone, you know, your beliefs shift, don't they? Your opinions shift over time.
It's a pretty typical reaction in terms of a starting point. Most people will have the starting point of, oh, I might be autistic. I need to get a diagnosis. That's the first thing I need to do, right? And actually, it doesn't actually solve a lot of the problems, like you were saying. That,
especially if you're an adult. I mean, the advantages are... Sorry, go ahead.
And the flip side is there are ways to solve the problems that you think the diagnosis is going to solve. So, for example, if you need some kind of support, having a diagnosis may or may not make it easier to get that, for example.
Yeah.
Like your example with the ADHD meds. You don't have an ADHD diagnosis, but you found a way to get the support you need for that. So in a way, actually getting the support was more important. And
yes.
the diagnosis is more of a pathway to different things. So very often when people say that, I'm always thinking, come back to me in about 4 or 5 months and see if you still think a diagnosis is as important as you do right now.
Well, it depends where you live as well, because different countries, different areas have vastly different levels of support. And for example, in the Netherlands, an autism diagnosis entitles you to weekly coach support, which has awesome. That's the only reason that my YouTube channel got off the ground, is because I had this coach coming in for 2 hours every week, and he would help me plan out my week. And my current coach also helps me do this, planning out my week, making sure I'm allocating my time and my energy correctly, and just trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? And the thing that I've learned is what I actually need is I need somebody to sit there while I talk about all the things that are in my head, and then we make sense out of it. And that seems like something really, it seems sometimes like I'm just talking at them, but if I don't do that, it doesn't get done. So that is the support.
It's part of the process. Yeah. It's a processing style.
Yeah, and you know, I can't ask my husband to sit there while I talk through all these things for 2 hours every week. That's probably not his idea of fun. So it's really interesting that, I mean, the coach is something that I don't think is available in almost any other country. At least not in the sort of systemic way that it is here. But I know that there are coaches, certainly ADHD coaches, but also autistic coaches that you can get privately. Obviously, that's not accessible to everyone.
And I guess the other main reason that's pretty common to seek a diagnosis is just that self-validation. I know a big part for me was just being sure that I wasn't crazy when I was telling someone, because I knew I would encounter resistance. I encountered a lot less than I thought I would, but I knew at some point I would encounter resistance, and I wanted to be sure within myself so that resistance didn't completely put me out.
Yeah, and it's funny though, because I still have, I don't know, I guess you call it like imposter syndrome. I still have days where I'm thinking, am I just making this all up? Am I actually autistic? And then I'm like, oh no, I've been through all this. Yeah, like you definitely are. Okay. Or I talk to my friends and who are also, well, autistic and ADHD, and they sort of validate me that way. But just because a professional says doesn't mean you don't still have moments of doubt. And then also having a YouTube channel and putting it all on the internet and just being like, have I just made this all up somehow? It is, you still doubt yourself. I don't know about you, but I still have these moments quite a bit.
I found the feedback I was getting online was extremely helpful to recognize that other people, other autistic people, shared my experience to a degree that most of the population does not share.
Yeah.
So before that, my experience was sharing something about myself and people going, that's weird, or just not really getting it. So I find that's probably the biggest validation for me, is when other people say, yes, I get that. That happens to me too sometimes.
Exactly. I mean, I actually get quite a lot of emails and comments, people saying like, are you my twin, or are you like, you are just exactly me, you are me. That's the a lot of emails like that, and I'm like, okay, all these individual personality quirks that I thought were just what made me me, were actually, it was all just autism. And after all, but I mean, it is very validating. And also when people say, I'm just like you and I just got my diagnosis, thank you, kind of thing, and then it's like, oh, it's not just a mistake that the assessor made, it's not wrong, all of these people who are just like me are also going to different people and getting their assessments and then getting their diagnosis, so it must be true. I don't know why I've been feeling more like that recently than usual, when I've probably been more autistic. I felt more autistic than usual, but I don't know. It takes a long time to process after your diagnosis, and for me it's been like, this is like, what year is it? What year was I diagnosed? It's been like 3.5 years, 4 years or something, and I'm still processing it. How long has it been since your diagnosis?
Uh, at least 5 years,
Mm.
maybe 7, something like that.
And do you feel like you're at the point where it's all assimilated into your identity, your sense of self?
I I don't really feel like there is a point that happens. Um, I kind of feel like I'm constantly learning things every day, and yeah, I, I didn't really feel like I hit a milestone in that regard. It's more like probably the milestones. Yeah, the milestones were a lot stronger back in the first month or 2 or 3. And then since then, it's just been sort of one little thing at a time. And for me, very often that's because of meeting others who I originally thought would have very different experiences to me, and then finding out something new about myself, like talking to, well, communicating with non speaking autistics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking originally, oh, well, that's just some other kind of experience that is not my experience. And then
Mm-hmm.
getting a little bit deeper and going, oh, we're connecting a lot more than I thought we would. Um, and discovering my own sensory stuff and just experimenting with different processing styles. A revelation the other day. Some of you might know that I'm, doing. I'm an autistic life coach as well, so that's something I'm sort of slowly building up. And a big question I have is, how much can I do that? How tiring is that? Because it's pretty intense to be kind of one-on-one with a person for an entire session.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really switched on kind of activity. The other day I had 5 clients in one day, and maybe lots of people do that all the time and it's really normal, but I hadn't had that many in one day before, and I was originally wondering how I was going to cope with that. Like, was that going to be fine? It turns out having 5 one-on-one coaching sessions in a day is less tiring than an afternoon writing emails.
I can believe that. Yeah.
So I would, if I want to save my energy, I just have 5 coaching clients every day and ditch my email writing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way the world works, it's pretty hard to ditch email writing when you work for yourself. Um,
I hate emails so much. You probably know how much I hate emails, because I was really keen to do this and I would just like not reply to your emails and be like, yeah, but I'm just really bad at it and I hate it. And those two things don't work very well together, and there's only so much that ADHD meds can do to fix that, isn't there?
yeah, they can't fix the I really don't want to do it at
Yeah.
all phenomenon.
It's because every single email is like you have to figure out ways to construct. I find that I mask more in emails probably than I do in real life because I'm like, this has to be so perfect. It has to be perfect communication. And so I overthink probably. And then I don't send them because I'm sitting there thinking and then I forget about the email and then it's been 8 days and I'm like, oh.
And then,
So sorry
and then
if anyone sent me an email. I will not get back to you.
It's taking so much time and effort and energy that I think, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are more emails tomorrow, and it builds up very, very quickly.
We've got a question in the chat I see here, who asks, Derpus McGee, who asks, how exactly did you deal with the sensory overwhelm of a baby crying for extended periods? And that's a really good question. I'm going to try and give a really good answer, but I'm like, I don't know. So I've had EMDR therapy, and one of the results of that is that the whole phase has sort of turned into a bit of a fuzzy black hole in my memory, which is probably a good thing. But earplugs and headphones, like you have to protect yourself. I went a bit, well, I say I went a bit nuts. That's a very rude way of saying that I was dealing my best with the situation. I actually installed a, what do you call it? Like a sound meter on my phone because I was trying to get validation that this was so loud. And I think it was picking up like 85 decibels at one point. That's wow, loud, yeah. Right? So yeah, I'm like, okay, you need sound protection. Like this is, babies cry really loud. And when they are in pain, they cry even louder. So sound protection. I think the answer is I didn't deal very well. You just keep going because you can't not. You can't stop the baby crying. Well, we couldn't stop the baby crying because we didn't know what was wrong with her at the time. We couldn't pass it off to anyone because there was no one. Pass her. But you know, like little newborns, I feel like they're mostly its, aren't they? You know, they're little blobs.
Not every language has genders.
I know.
Some language just has it, and it means man, woman, object, everything.
That's fine. Yeah, the blob,
we
the
screaming.
Exactly. There's really no need to gender babies anyway. The little screaming monster. You know, we didn't really have family support. We didn't have close friends who'd be like, I will take your baby for 2 hours while you go upstairs and cry. So we just muddled through. We just fought through that time and somehow came out alive. And I would say intact, but we weren't intact. By the time that she was in hospital, which was more for our benefit at that point than for hers because we were not capable at that point. We went so far. It was 4.5 months. We weren't really capable anymore. They said to us, like, by the time the baby gets to hospital, the parents need treatment for trauma, and that's not because you're autistic. That is just, if you've been through all of this, you're going to need treatment. My case was a very extreme case, and babies cry in different ways. The extreme crying is something that, like, there isn't an answer to that other than, I would say, before you have a kid, like, get a support network in place. At least find out how to find babysitters, find out how to find childcare in an emergency, all of these things. Because my son was, relatively speaking, an easy baby, we just thought, oh, we'll have another easy baby, right? He'll be fine. Super. But yeah, I don't know if that was a very good answer, but that is kind of what happened. I mean, despite the EMDR therapy, sorry.
We do talk more about this and lots of other motherhood-related issues
yes, we do.
in Sam's upcoming session at the Autism from the Inside online summit that's coming up on the 19th of September. So definitely lots more that we could cover on that.
I won't spoil the ending. The ending is we all survived. That's the important part, right?
Well, sometimes that's all you can do. And I get the sense that, you know, the whole global pandemic thing was really tough on a lot of people. And sometimes you don't realize what you need until it's gone. So I know for me, leaving university was a really big thing because I
Hmm.
didn't realize how good my support networks were at that time. And then suddenly I'm in full time work and I have to, you know, spend 40 to 50 hours a week at work and I don't have the friends support network and I'm, you know, living in a different place and all of these other things.
Hmm.
So those kind of massive life changes, they are often where we trip up and fall over.
Yeah, and I think that it's those the life transitions, like you said. That's I think those are the points where people tend to get their diagnosis, or at least realize, when they start. I think for a lot of people, when you start university, that is like such a big shift. Or a lot of people in their early 30s when they have kids or something like that. So it's these big transitions where everyone else seems to cope better. I don't know, that was my perception. And then all of a sudden I'm like, why am I not coping in the same way that everyone else is? Um, but I mean, I didn't struggle as much
That was
leaving university because I didn't have any friends at university. I had one friend.
ironically, we were talking about sort of self validation and imposter syndrome and stuff before. And one of my biggest imposter syndrome tendencies is something along the lines of, yeah, but I'm an engineer. Of course, I would have all of these preferences and etc. etc. And so
Because all the
the
other
flip side of,
engineers are as well.
yeah. However, that's not true because if you look at my friendship group from who all studied engineering with me, it's was a fantastic group of people. We're still in contact today, like a dozen of us or so at least. Um, then what's my excuse among those groups? It's like, sure, we nerd out on some things, but I'm still clearly the odd one out in a lot of situations, even among that group. So
But that's okay, isn't it?
that's kind of validating for me because sometimes I think,
Yeah.
oh, but maybe it's just like I originally diagnosed myself as an engineer and dismissed the autism concept offhand before I knew much about it.
Yeah, I've I diagnosed myself. Well, when you do psychology, it's like when you do medicine, you think like, what have I got? I definitely thought that I had borderline personality disorder while I was at uni, and it turns out I was just autistic and was having a super horrible reaction to the contraceptive pill that I was on, which apparently causes this reaction in a lot of people, and they still just prescribe it. So it was that combination that caused what I thought was this sort of like maladaptive behavior, and it was actually just I was literally just reacting to hormones and an undiagnosed autistic and ADHD. So yeah, but yeah, doing psychology, I suspect a lot of my cohort were neurodivergent in some way, but I found it very hard to connect with people at university because I built it up in my head as this place where you go and everybody loves to learn and we all hang out in the library in these, stately buildings and it's just a certain way. That's how I had it in my head and the reality was just so different.
Um, so where does the study fall in your journey? Did you finish the psychology before discovering autism?
Yeah, well, the psychology course that I was on, I studied psychology at York University in the UK, and it's considered, very good, top course in the country. Well, maybe not top, but very high up, very prestigious, and we learned about autism being the extreme male brain and blah blah blah. And I think the lecturer, the person who did that module, is actually mates with Simon Baron Cohen. So but this was when did I start? 2005. So it was a while ago, but it was literally just the stereotype. It was all stereotypes. Everything we learned about autism, There was just, it was like, well, 4 times as common in men and this and that. And there was also a lot of weird, I don't know what to call it, misogyny is the right way, but like, well, autistic people are like this because men are like this, or it was stuff like that. You know, all these characteristics that are apparently male, and I'm like, hold on a second. Oh, sorry, I've got an alarm. That's actually my take my meds alarm.
Yeah, if the extreme male brain theory didn't ring any alarm bells, then
I mean, you trust that when you go to a university that they're giving you correct information. So, yeah.
yeah. What is correct information, I guess?
Well, the most correct information at the time. Yes. I mean, that is a whole thing. They probably felt like it was correct at the time. But the thing that I do enjoy about psychology, as I have gone out of university but continue to stay kind of up to date, because it is one of my big interests, is how wrong all of it is, and how pseudo-scientific it is wrapped up as a science. And it's just like they take, you know, 80 psychology undergraduates and they extrapolate to the wider population. So I've become very critical of the whole field of psychology and psychiatry as I've been, you know, getting older and looking more critically at it.
I tend to be fairly apolitical on those types of things. There's a question in the chat: are Simon Baron-Cohen's views problematic? So I would take a fairly what's the word? Non-critical answer and say a lot of the research was done a long time ago before we really started hearing the voices of actually autistic adults. So there are a lot of things that we used to think, things that literally had names like autism and Asperger's is the extreme male brain theory. But yeah, I tend to not be quite as critical. Sam, you might want to be more critical.
Look, everybody's got problematic views. I think that's the first thing. The problem is also the nature of academic publishing and the way that he's become this forefront expert, and it's like, okay, who puts him there? You know, how is he getting there and other researchers are not? It's not because he's better. He's clearly just in with the right people. You know, he was clearly in with my old professor. Like he's in that circle that is a very kind of, it's closed off. So academic publishing kind of, I don't want to say prioritizes, but it promotes people with problematic views as long as they are part of the system, and often doesn't challenge these views. I mean, I can't remember what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, so I am pretty critical of him, because I think that he just, first of all, I would like him to maybe be a little bit more self-reflective, and I think most people will probably know what I mean if they know him. I just think that there might be something staring him in the face that perhaps he has not considered. That's all I'm going to say. Is that problematic? Perhaps. But yeah, I mean, the fact that he kind of still profits presumably off of this research, you know, I don't think there's a lot of money in publishing. When people say, oh, you've got a book out, you must be a super millionaire, you know, like, people don't make money from books. But I think that he maybe has some reflection to do, and yeah, so it's a difficult question to answer because it's so multifaceted, isn't it?
The whole system of how the human race gathers knowledge is radically changing. Is this too deep?
No. I was actually reading an article about this earlier.
Because it used to be that people in academia go and study things, and then 50 years later, the general public hears about it, and then another 50 years later, it's sort of common knowledge. And nowadays, you don't need to go to university to get information. It used to be that you had to go to a university because that's the only way you had access to world leading knowledge. Whereas now, a lot of current experts are writing books within 5 years or so of, they're in the middle of their career, and they're actually publishing their work. So it gives the general public a little bit more agency, I guess, to be part of it. And if we want to bring it back to the autism space, it means that we can influence the type of questions that they ask in research, which is great. A lot of research organizations in Australia, at least, are building in having autistic consultation of the research question, even before they go and do anything, which is fantastic. Because if we look at some of the older research that you were referring to, a lot of the time it's a misunderstanding of what you're actually trying to do, which invalidates the whole process.
Yeah.
So you kind of need that second guessing of the system before you go and do the research, because after you've done it, it's too easy to be critical of something when they didn't think of it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are so many problems with the whole structure of academic research. I mean, if you just sort of, the old adage, follow the money, that's a huge one, especially when it comes to research being done in the States, where primarily the ABA industry is, an absolutely massive industry, and they are influential because of the amount of money that they make, and the model. The reason they got that rich is because the people who are the most trained do not carry it out. It's sort of like a McDonald's model, isn't it? Like there are people at the top who are allegedly trained, and I don't believe in behaviorism, but they're allegedly highly trained, but then everybody who is actually working with clients are often fresh out of high school, and that is a model that you can make profit like that, can't you? But it's definitely something that I haven't really covered so much in my videos, because first of all, I don't have experience with that. It's very easy to be critical of things that you read on the internet, isn't it? But it's maybe better to actually hear from people who have first-hand experience of these things.
So what is it that you are focused on sharing with your channel? Like, what's the most important thing for you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when I started, it was very much a sort of like, I need to be heard, I need to be validated sort of thing. And so a lot of the stuff I shared was just like, my first video was my diagnosis story, because I thought that people still wouldn't believe me. So I wanted to explain it in great detail. And then it kind of, I didn't know it was gonna take off like this. It became a thing, and all of a sudden you are a content curator. You are responsible for the creative and the content direction, and it's not always obvious where to go. If you want to continue making videos, you think, okay, well, my tendency, I was actually talking about this yesterday, my tendency is to go a little bit too academic, because I feel like I have to prove myself, even on the internet. Even now, I'm like, I know what I'm talking about, so here are all these journals that we researched and referenced and stuff like that. But actually, that's not necessarily what people want to watch. People want stuff they relate to. They want maybe stuff that's fun and lighthearted, and so I'm going to try and find that balance of my kind of autistic urge to get things absolutely correct, with also just trying to be a bit more relaxed about it, because there are so many resources and that there is so much information, but what there is still not is, I would say, light-hearted representation. There still isn't a lot of media representation. It's getting better slowly, but the thing about YouTube is that I have control over my edits. So, for example, it's great. You might think that there's a, love on the spectrum. I'm sure you're aware of. Like, in theory, it's great that a show like that exists, but if the narrative is still from a neurotypical perspective, then that isn't necessarily giving the autistic people involved agency over how they are presented on TV. And yeah, that's I kind of have a bit of a problem with that. It's great to include us, but we need to be the ones in charge of the narrative. So that's kind of I don't know if how that relates exactly to my YouTube channel. I think it does in a roundabout way. About being in charge of what you're saying and how you're representing yourself.
I mean, half the point of a YouTube channel is that you get to express yourself and you are in control, and you can do the topics you want to cover, you can say what you want about them, and you can really take creative license with that. And there's a value in that, just because we get to hear so with reference to your channel, for example, we get to hear what is important for you with that. And for other channels, there's lots more actually autistic people getting out there sharing their story these days, which is fantastic. And when we set the schedule and the agenda, then we talk about certain things that the neurotypical population don't really care about, and probably wouldn't end up on mainstream TV.
Or would never think about.
Or would never think to include, yeah. Exactly. And it goes way past the kind of stereotypical questions like, how do you find a date? And things like that.
I'm just
there was
seeing
a
there's
question
another
in the chat
Yeah.
about your uni experience. I thought I saw earlier.
I saw one from Susie about people feeling sorry for you. That one came first, so I'll answer that first. How do you deal with people who say they feel sorry for you? I'm autistic, my kids are autistic, why are people sorry for me? I don't know. I think I don't get a lot of people saying stuff like that. I think probably because I'm a bit like, I don't know, if they said that to me I'd probably get a bit arsey, so maybe they're a bit scared to say something like that. I think people are sorry because they assume that life must be so awful. That's the assumption, that every day must be a struggle. You can't function like everyone, and it's just there is no joy. And that is why I think it is so important to be ourselves on the internet, to be like, yes, I am just silly. I am a silly person, and I take joy in making jokes that maybe people don't always find funny, but like, that is my joy. I like to talk. I like to monologue on the internet. And we don't see a lot of autistic joy represented. We see autistic pain represented. We don't see the joy of stimming from an autistic point of view very often. I mean, I don't actually do a lot about that, but I have these that I just discovered, and these are brilliant because they don't make any noise, so you can use them on Zoom calls and on lives. And they provide, like, they're just, oh, you've got one of those, yeah. They're just sort of prickly enough to provide, like, really, really good feedback, although I now have spots. Maybe I should stop. I've been doing it a little bit ferociously. So, yeah, do you know what? Like, when people ask me questions like, how do you deal with people? I don't really know. I don't always feel very good or very confident about dealing with people. I'm not actually a very good communicator in my everyday life because I have a tendency to get very... if I get like a little bit triggered, I have a tendency to kind of not address that and sort of shut down and people please and just smooth it over and it, like, just internalize it, and then rant about it later to my husband usually, which is not necessarily healthy, but I was never really taught maybe healthy communication styles, and that's something that I'm trying to work on. But if somebody said, oh, I feel so sorry for you, I would say, well, don't. You can feel sorry for me for a variety of reasons.
people don't know what to do. This is something that I've really learned recently. Is I used to assume that neurotypical communication had some kind of meaning or purpose to it. And a lot of the time, they're just saying what you're supposed to say because they actually have no idea what to say. So you might
Yeah.
say, so we got our autism diagnosis, for Jackie, making up a name here, earlier today. And they go, uh-oh,
They
that's
go,
not in the
oh, I'm
script.
so sorry to hear
What do
that.
I,
And
what do
yeah.
I say? And they say, oh, I know I'm supposed to react. Sorry? Congratulations? I don't know.
Yeah,
um,
exactly. I mean, this is
so
the thing that
part of
neurotypical have such a reputation for being like so good at social stuff, and I'm like, people aren't. People have not been
they're
taught how
not.
to communicate
No,
effectively. Like, they're
no.
different, but they're not necessarily better than us. That's a hill I'm willing to
And
die on.
it's actually, if you can manage your own reaction, because often it's triggering because they say, oh, I'm sorry, and you get angry or some other similar negative reaction because you don't like the fact that they've said sorry. But if we can get past that, it's a fantastic teaching opportunity if we recognize that they actually don't know what to say, which
Yeah.
means they're looking to you for leadership and guidance as to how to take the news. So if you tell people in a happy way, they will say, "Oh, well, they're saying this in as if it's a good thing. Maybe I should treat it like a good thing." Um, I'm not a parent. I get the sense that parenting is pretty tough a lot of the time, which has the downside that a lot of communication that parents have about their children is often negative. um, and that's not, and it's often positive as well, I suppose, but it depends how you're going and how you're feeling at the time. So we can kind of manage that for ourselves to make sure that people see all of the sides.
Yeah, I mean, parenting is a pretty wild ride. I think the thing that I wasn't expecting is how much having kids takes you back to your own childhood and the way that you were raised. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're saying things. And you're like, why did I say that? And it's just something that has come out of something you've heard in your own childhood. And you're like, wait, did I really mean that? And a lot of the times you don't. You just said it. It's like an automatic thing because you must have been in that situation, like being irritating or something. Your parent says something, and so you just it's so easy to pass on all these things, and you. So for me, I've had to be extremely conscious about, first of all my little triggers that I didn't even know were there. And because they weren't there before the kids started, pushing on them.
Yeah.
And then also this sort of consciously unpacking, like, why did my parents parent the way they did? How were they parented? And looking through the generational trauma, which I think is kind of, certainly for millennials who are now raising children, it's sort of a bit of a hot topic, generational trauma, because what you realize is your grandparents, a lot of them lived through the war. My grandparents were Jewish refugees, so like I can't even imagine what kind of a trauma they went through. And then they came to the UK and they got married and then they just had kids. And I'm just like, oh, and how did that go for you?
Yeah.
And so I know that my grandmother had. I mean, I'm pretty sure both of my grandparents were autistic. Looking back at the, I don't want to say red flags, but clear traits. But, then you think, okay, so you were a child born in the 50s who has two parents who are not in their native country. They've lost the support. They've often lost a lot of the financial stuff that, like everything that built up, a lot of that had been lost. And in the 50s, it was just this attitude of like, everybody gets on with this. There's no time for emotions. Like, let's not even talk about it. So it was a very emotionally shut down time for everyone. And then they have kids and they don't know how to deal with that because their parents parented them in a certain way. And, us kids of the 80s and 90s are all like, what? But we've been told to talk about our feelings because that's what we learned on TV, you know. So it's like when you have kids, I find that the generation stuff has become very obvious to me, like looking through how these things are transmitted from parent to child to parent to child, you know. And that's something, when you add in a family with multiple neurodivergent members, that becomes even more complicated, because then it's like, is this a trait or is this something that's learned? Can I avoid passing this on?
And
You know.
and the thing with families is that when you're growing up, that's all you know. So that is the way to do things. That's the only way to do things. That's the right way to do things. And so these days, with, as you know, the world's getting bigger and we're getting so many more influences, suddenly we're questioning those things, thinking, oh, maybe I have a choice to do things differently, and I don't have to do the, you know, the right thing that I was always taught was the right way to do things. You know, when I was
There's another question here about shall I answer that one? The university
I
one.
was just going to take that opportunity for another quick plug. If anyone has just joined us, Sam is speaking at the Autism from the Inside Online Summit coming up on the 19th of September on the topic of autism, motherhood as an autistic woman. So we'll get into a lot more about the overlap there in that one. What question did you see in the chat, Sam?
Can you talk a bit more about your experience at university from an autistic viewpoint? I'm starting at uni next week for the first time and was also diagnosed autistic in my early 30s. Sorry. I do actually have a whole video I did on that topic, which is probably worth a watch. It's called, like, I don't know, Autism in University or something like that. But do have a look for that, because I think it's like a 25-minute video or something. So if you're diagnosed in your early 30s, you'll be a mature student. So that's going to be a very different experience from being, you know, well, when I started, I was 19, surrounded by people of similar age. I struggled the most with the social aspect. I found the workload pretty comparable to my school A-level workload. I enjoyed my subject, and that was something that I really, as you can tell, I like talking about psychology, and I like learning about psychology. So the sort of academic stuff, aside from the ADHD and the complete inability to get deadlines, to stick to deadlines, the academic side of it was okay for me. It was fun. But the social stuff was really hard, and I still don't exactly know why it was so hard, because I'd had successfully made friends in the past. I think that it was a very different kind of it was different people than I had met in my life. York University is very kind of like white and middle class, and that's not to say that I hadn't met those people before, but I still remember playing some drinking game or whatever in the first term, and it was based upon your surname, right? And everybody was going around saying their surnames or whatever, and they were all just very English surnames, and it was one of these things where I grew up in the UK and whatever, and I said my surname was Stein, and it was like the silence fell across the room, like, what kind of a name is that? I'm just like, oh my god. And so I felt really different from everyone, and I compensated by age 19. Obviously I didn't have the coping strategy, so I compensated by drinking a lot, and then I could attribute my weirdness to, I'm just very drunk, I'm so sorry, any social gaffes I made, I'm just so drunk, sorry, just don't know what I'm doing, kind of thing. And that was like a big masking thing. Obviously it was terrible for my health and terrible for my mental health, and I would not recommend that to anyone. But I just struggled to find the groups that I fit in, and I think that if I went now, obviously I'd be like, where is the autistic group? And then I would be like, yes, it's my people. So I think my if I can give any advice, it is just to try and find your people. I tried for 3 years and was quite unsuccessful. I made more friends when I did my master's in London, because we were all really nerdy about the same really specific topic. And I think the people who do a master's in religion and contemporary society are probably, is kind of a niche. So you know, find that niche. That's my advice. You didn't actually ask for my advice, so like I don't know why I'm like, I'm going to dispense my wisdom now. But I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting how different people's experience can be. It really just depends on if you find a way that works for you or not. So if you find a good group of people, if you find a good study habit, then you can have a fantastic time. And if you don't, then you might spend the whole time trying to find a niche or trying to find that study habit, which is pretty challenging.
So I think there's a few more. Do you think both people who have autism could really connect with one another? Not always, but definitely a connection or somewhat chemistry. I'm not sure I understand that one. I think people with autism do generally connect to each other really well. Not always, but there is usually a sense of when you meet someone in the wild, you're like, I recognize you.
We have a way of finding each other, and it's almost like I have a ball and I throw it at someone and I'm like, come on, let's play. And if they look at me like I'm a weirdo, well, that didn't work and I'll try someone else. But if they respond positively to my eccentricity, then the chances that they are also not following the mainstream are fairly high. And
I tend to find ADHD people much quicker, or like I think my beacon, when I'm in socializing mode, my beacon screams more ADHD than autism, because I'm like out and I'm revved and I don't know, whatever. But it was part of the reason why I sort of realized that I was ADHD, because like I kept on getting people that I knew from school messaging me and saying, oh, I just got my ADHD diagnosis. It's so cool that you're making autism content. And then realizing that most of my friends historically that I grew up with, they're like, oh yeah, I definitely have ADHD traits. So it's like those are the people that I'm most socially sort of attracted to as friends. And then for me, I think it's the combo of the how do you say it? ADHD or ADHD, I don't know how to pronounce it, but you know, the combination of the autism and ADHD is this sort of it feels like a sweet spot for me. It feels like that's a balance, even though it pulls at both sides. When I meet other people who have both of them, I'm like, you are my people, because I relate to autistic people and I relate to ADHD people, but I really, really, really relate to people with both. Am I even answering? What question am I even answering? I'm not sure. See, I did have an alarm to take my meds, and now it's, you can tell it's slowly wearing off.
It's like, did someone ask for your advice this time, or is this one free?
Did I just make up this question in my head? Someone said, is the term autist problematic? I don't think so. I think we get very caught up on language as a community.
I did a really thorough video on language, autism language, recently. Check it out.
Check it out, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we should probably wrap up soon. Maybe we can take one or two more questions, but I just want to set people's expectation that we are getting more questions than we have time to answer. We have a question from Natasha. Do you have children? And the answer is, I do not, but Sam does.
I have
two of them. And
we will talk about that more in the, you say it, I don't know the
topic
words.
hence the topic of motherhood as an autistic woman at the upcoming online summit. So we also had a comment in the chat, how do I get onto that summit? There's a link in the description. The registration is free. Tell your friends. It's a fantastic lineup with over 20 international autistic speakers, handpicked by me, essentially. So yeah, get onto that if you haven't already. Maybe we can have time for one more question in the chat.
I don't know how to pronounce her name. Eleonora, we'll say.
Yep.
Really sorry. How do you find forced socialization as a mum? I find I have a script for talking to other parents that seems to work well. Well, most of my motherhood journey, a lot of it has been with COVID, and so I've been stuck in the house with my child, not socializing. Stuck in the house with my child, that sounds, you know. But so I'm actually kind of like trying to socialize, but I'm trying to meet parents who kind of get it. I find that probably it's okay to say this. I find that the kids that my child naturally is drawn to also tend to have neurodivergent traits with or without a diagnosis, and therefore, the statistically speaking, the chances are higher that these children with these traits may have parents with similar traits. I don't think any of these people actually watch my YouTube channel, and they probably won't watch yours, so it's probably safe to say something.
You're being very diplomatic.
that is roundabout like that. But I think that, you know, I try and just sort of go with the parents that I'm drawn to and build those relationships. It's been kind of hard. My son's only had 1 year in school, and then this year has been with the baby, so I've been very much like, you know, stuck in the house. So I'm actually kind of looking forward. I don't find it forced. I don't find that there's very much forced socialization. I do quite like talking to people. I'm quite a social bunny. And then I need lots of recovery time.
I did one of these personality tests after COVID, and apparently I'm an extrovert now.
Why?
Instead of
you just wanted to see a person.
No, because I kept ticking the I would prefer to leave the house and go to something outside the house versus stay at home and read a book kind of questions.
I mean, I think the introvert extrovert thing, there needs to be another sort of method developed by neurodivergent people, because I think so much of my extrovert traits are actually ADHD traits. And so many of my so-called introvert traits are just like, I like reading, so sure, I'd like to read a book, you know, but it doesn't actually say very much about who I am as a person. I'm trying to, oh yeah, those, what are they called, the Myers-Briggs personality type, I don't like those. Every time I do those personality ones, I get a different one. So I'm like, this doesn't sound very scientific. It's because it was made up, and that's why I'm going to make enemies now. I'm dissing the Myers-Briggs test.
Is there anyone else you would like to diss before we
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've got a list.
I should not be encouraging you. I should really not be encouraging you.
No, I don't. I have strong opinions about things like Myers-Briggs, but like when it comes to people, I try and be a bit more mellow, you know. Apart from people like Simon Baron Cohen, and I'm like, he's got enough privilege. I can attack him a little bit, can't I? He can deal with it. I don't know. Maybe. I'd rather be in a room with his cousin, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, well, I think we should wrap up there. We've been going for a little over an hour now. So, is there anything?
My next video. Here are people I don't diss. That's a nice one.
Is there anything you'd like to promote that you're doing at the moment before we wrap up?
I would like to promote the summer vacation that I'm on. I think it's a very nice idea to take a break over summer. I'm working on a workbook at the moment, and I hope to get that finished at least before, you know, like Christmas, the Black Friday Christmas sort of thing. And it's basically kind of like a workbook for people who are kind of like, I think I'm autistic, but I'm really confused and I have all these memories and I don't really know how to structure it. So it's sort of like a guided thing that will take you through, like, okay, what are your sensory aversions? What are your sensory joys? You know, like all these different things based around the DSM, but not like validating the DSM, to help you, basically to help people who are really confused make sense of everything in a kind of structured way. And it's very much like it's going to be a workbook that you write in. So I'm hoping to finish that in the next few months, and I guess that's just like subscribe to me and you'll probably hear about it. I don't have any links or anything to actually do, but that is what I'm working on at the moment. So I'm really hoping that I can get that one finished when I get some childcare in and I can actually work again. That's my plug, and please subscribe to my channel if you don't already.
Yeah, you heard it. If you're watching all the way to the end of this, you definitely need to subscribe to Sam's channel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the rules. In fact, we should put like an automatic sort of, anyway.
I think you can. I think you can definitely link from one live to another. So you can do a live and then you can be like, go over to this channel now. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do that YouTube have done while I've been not doing lives. So, but maybe would you like to come on my channel for a live again before the summit to have another chat?
This
is
has
awkward.
Been fun.
I put you on the spot. You're like, no. I'd rather not.
This has been fun. Got any ideas? Let me know. Keep in touch. Sounds great. I always love the phrase, let's take it offline. You know how, have you ever been in a meeting and people say, let's take it offline? I'm like, we're not online.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't do those kind of meetings. Someone said, you guys should live more often. It's very exciting.
Well, thanks to everyone who is watching live right now, who's made this the chat very interesting and engaging in that way, who's asked us questions and given us an audience to bounce back off, which has been fantastic. Thanks again, Sam.
Thank you for
my
having me.
attempts at saying goodbye are really poor, so I might just have to, it'll probably feel a bit abrupt, but I've been trying to land this plane for a little while now, so it shouldn't be a surprise. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Sam. Subscribe to Sam's channel.
I'm just going to wave until you say bye.
Check out the summit stuff, and we will see you next time. I have a very exciting surprise guest next week for a live. Fingers crossed. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but hopefully I will announce that soon. So stay tuned. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you all later.
Bye. Let's not make it awkward.